Welcome to Which, the Women in Technology Creative Industries Hub, elevating the voices of women in tech. My name is Bishi, the founder of Which. In this podcast, I'll be talking to a woman in tech about her work, journey, life, and process. In this episode, I'll be talking to Anil Sebastian, a multifaceted artist, producer, and vocalist. They are the co-founder and director of the London Contemporary Voices. Please do like, review, and subscribe. We're a new podcast, and every bit of support helps. Welcome to Creative Women in Tech. Anil Sebastian, how are you feeling now that lockdown 3 is lifting slowly?
Excited, anxious, confused. Don't want it to. Kind of partly just want to stay in locked down, actually. Part of me does, if I'm honest. But also, yeah, excited and kind of ready to interact with people again and be a real human in the world of other humans.
I hear you. So you are someone that has worked across so many fascinating disciplines, and how would you define your practice?
I would say it comes from emotion, and for me, that's what leads everything. Feeling, and connecting with that feeling, and that will come out mostly in singing, but in composition, or sometimes in film, or in writing, or in whatever form it will come out in. It will come out, but that's what everything has in common.
I understand you have a degree in physics and philosophy. So where did your journey with music begin?
Well, I don't really remember. I was in a band with my older siblings called, well, I think it was called Play School. And I think I might have been like 2 or 3. And I was the singer. And they would play. And then they'd say, Anil, scream. And I'd go, ah! It was kind of like quite punk. And yeah, apart from that, my dad played music in the house. He loved DJing and playing records. And but his relationship with music was really complicated. He was an amazing murdugum player.
Wow.
Really, yeah. And he was on the radio and everything in Malaysia where he grew up. But yeah, it was complicated. He was meant to be a doctor, you see.
I see.
That's what he was sent to become. And obviously he arrived here in this sort of strange era of the UK. That didn't happen. He was very much more an artist, really, I think. Or well, I mean, why is there this division between the arts and sciences anyway? I've never really understood that. But they're one in the same, really, in a lot of ways. But his relationship with music was really complicated by that. And I think he had this real kind of conflict within himself about us and music. So us kids and music. So it was kind of like, on the one hand, encouraging it, facilitating it, really encouraging it in quite a punk sort of a way, like, break boundaries, do unusual things and do whatever you want, be free, and you don't have to, just kind of like a very, very open approach to it. But at the same time, that's, not your main focus. You need to just study, become a doctor. So I think he was really divided about it. And one minute he'd be saying that, another minute this. But the whole narrative was go be a doctor, really. And my rebellion against that was doing physics and philosophy. Ooh!
So amazing.
God, I was so badass. But genuinely, that's what I wanted to do. I loved physics. I absolutely loved physics and maths. I loved everything, actually. at school. I loved all the subjects apart from PE.
Right.
Genuinely, I could have done anything and I would have been happy as Larry. I loved physics. I loved philosophy. Really changed my life. But music just carried on the whole time, and so it was in the first year of uni. That's when I first met Imogen Heap. Not the first met her, but that's when I first worked with her. So I met her when I started working with her then, and went on tour with her that summer. So all of these things happened in between, and I started making my own first album, which I never released around the same time. So
Yeah.
that's the yeah. If I don't know, that's an answer.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. And there are bits of that I completely relate to. My mum
Mm.
was is a very respected singer, and it was a big part of our lives, but it was also that I just had to be academic, and I just had to, they wanted me to get an English degree, and I think she wanted me to be some kind of she wanted me to be on the BBC, she wanted me to be a newsreader on the BBC or
Okay. I can see that.
something around something around going to Oxbridge and being on the BBC. That's
Yeah.
what I wanted. And
Yeah.
my rebellion was to go absolutely mental when I was about 14 and just run off with the Queer Circus. Hi, and here I am. Hi,
Oh, I love it. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think yeah, I mean, my dad got very sick around that age, and I think that changed things and made me feel much more drawn to try and somehow give him that as his parting thing, because he died when I was 17. So it was all quite difficult, but in a weird way, it was the Oxbridge thing that I managed to sway him with, because I said, well, actually, I'd quite like to go to Oxford, and if I go there, I'd do physics and philosophy. And he kind of just went, deal, all right, you can either do medicine or you can go to Oxford. And then I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go to Bristol. And I didn't even apply to Oxbridge because I thought it was stuffy and the music scene was pants, and I wanted to go to Bristol because I liked Portishead and Massive Attack, and I somehow thought I'd go there and then everything would be great, and I'd meet those musicians and make music with them or something. I don't know what I thought.
Amazing. And so
Yeah.
what were the first pieces of music to make a really big impact on you?
Oh God. That's hard to answer. I think everything did, like, is the answer. I was like this little sponge, and I kind of just was completely obsessed and overwhelmed by music. And I had this old radio with a spinny dial on it where you tuned into the stations, and I just used to spin it and see where it landed, and then I would get another one and do the same thing, so there'd be two on at once, and I'd get my dad's old tapes and chop them up into little tape loops, and I was just obsessed with kind of shoving things together and seeing what happened. And yeah, I mean, anything really, from flipping Metallica Black Album to Portishead to, I remember hearing that in primary school, and just singing it, and maybe that was like my kind of transness coming through, I just want to be a woman,
Yeah.
And then Bjork, I was obsessed with Bjork even in primary school, and that just continued, and she continues to be a real hero of mine in music right the way through, and everyone that works with her as well, and that whole team and generation of incredible innovators. But then classical music wise, Arvo Pärt, Stockhausen, I liked all the weird composers, I think, typically. And
yes, Queen, I hear you.
and anything with voices, I was just obsessed with singing. So I liked unusual voices, because I liked singing along with them and seeing if I could do it. So I would just enjoy doing that, no matter who it was, and just enjoy copying their phrasing and tone.
Yeah. And my next question was going to be about, can you remember what the first piece of technology to really impact your childhood? But it sounds like this spinny radio and cutting up
The
your
spinning
dad's
radio.
text. Yeah, yeah. I mean, but that's really radical to go, oh, I know, I'm going to cut up some tape. Like,
Oh, I was awful. I butchered several guitars that I got. I save up and buy a guitar or something, and save up my paper round money, and then butcher it and take it apart, put it back together. Oh, what does it sound like if I take out all the frets? And or like tune it different, play it with. You just wanted to make everything sound different, and I was just curious. It was just curiosity, dismantling things and reassembling them, really. But in terms of technology, we had a copy of a piece of software called Voyetra on a PC, and my dad was we weren't allowed to have games consoles or anything like that, but we did have like a BBC microcomputer, shows my age, and like later Ataris that we used at school, but like it was programming, actually, MIDI, and Voyetra was a MIDI sequencer, so I just started doing that and making these really funny little tunes on MIDI.
that's amazing. Yeah. Oh no, I think it's fine to show your age. I really don't care.
Yeah, I mean, come on, what's the point in?
Also,
I can't be bothered with that. I mean,
yeah. Also, just like we're just Huns for life. I mean, let's face it. It's just a Hun for life.
Yeah.
So, how did you come to co-found the London Contemporary Voices?
Oh well, so that was basically Imogen Heap is the answer to that. She was doing a show at the Royal Albert Hall, and I got in touch saying, I really want to come. Can I come along? My brother was working with her at the time as her tour manager as well, production kind of manager for the show. And so I was like, can I come? And she was like, yeah, sure. But the only thing is, guest list is really tight at Royal Albert Hall. But I want everyone I've ever worked with on stage in some way. And I want this choir. And I thought maybe you could sing in the choir. And I thought, great, sounds good. I like singing. But it turned out that there wasn't really a choir yet. And partly because lots of people who were going to be in the choir ended up on stage doing other things. Yeah. And so I was tasked with creating one. So between myself and my then partner, who was the co-founder, and we're still very good friends, and his sister and a few other people, we kind of rounded up everybody we knew who sang and put together this group of people. And that's how it started. And then we did it. I thought, oh, I like this. Should we carry it on? And then we did. And I didn't really know. I mean, I knew about choirs from church because my mum was, it still is, very Catholic, and we grew up singing in church. And I knew about that kind of choir singing, and a very good friend of mine and my counsellor at the time encouraged me to sing in the uni choir. I was terrified of that. I really just felt out of place and like I was not good enough and all of those sorts of things. But that kind of was the first time I sang in a classical choir, as it were. And so, yeah, it's a strange route in, but it's not like I went and studied choral music and, so I think quite a lot of people find me very annoying because I sort of didn't do that. But in that, I think it creates a unique perspective. And in a way, when you bring someone in who is creative in some other way, I think it's almost like every orchestra should have a guest creative director for a residency to see what happens because I think you'd get really interesting results, and I think it might challenge some kind of very sort of norms that are in these.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. And the London Contemporary Voices have worked with so many incredible people. What's the first evocative, like there's so many great collaborations. It's really trite to be like, what was your favorite collaboration? What's a particularly evocative collaboration that's kind of coming up in this moment?
It's for me. This sounds really cheesy and it sounds really contrived, but for me, there was someone in the choir. She doesn't sing with us anymore, and her mum. When people watched fireworks, her mum would turn around and face the wrong way because she liked watching the people watching the fireworks. And I know this is a very cheesy story, but it's just true for me. I really enjoy the experience of being with the family, with this whole set of people with voices and stories. And for me, it's not the working with the artists; it's seeing them and seeing that kind of magic happen. So sometimes the biggest shows that you do, if you're at iTunes Festival or on the stage at Glastonbury or wherever it is, or at the Proms, sometimes those moments aren't ones that you sort of take in because you're so like, I've got to get it right. And sometimes it's the moments before and afterwards and in rehearsal, or the moments where you're singing on the bus all together on the way home, or it's that I remember the most and I love the most. But the one thing that really stands out for me, there was a show which had Imogen Heap in it, and Guy Sigsworth, who's a very good friend of mine and mentor and musical hero long before I realised it was him behind all my favourite music, and Manu Delago, and Shlomo, beatboxer, and lots of other people, but having all of those people on stage at once with the choir, it was the coming together of so many things that meant so much to me, and the feeling of family and the feeling of like connection and being in the moment. I just felt so alive at that show. That was just wonderful for me. And coming up, one thing that's been really difficult for me is the very binary nature of orchestras and choirs, particularly choirs, because we associate gender with voice parts, and so there is this very like women stand this side, men stand this side. What do you do if you're neither of those things? What do you do when you're trans? What do you do when you're transitioning? And so increasingly, as I started to go through that journey, and a couple of other people in the group that I knew that was really painful. And there was some gigs and some bookings that we did for clients of ours. I just felt the most phenomenal dysphoria and felt really like uncomfortable and suddenly really dissociated from what I was doing in the space that I had actually been such a part of founding and creating. I'd suddenly like found myself alienated by it. And so we're setting up the first ever transgender non-conforming professional choir. So there are other ones that exist that are brilliant communities, and this is our first professional one as far as I know. And the purpose of that is to show what we can do and to break some of the myths that people who are transitioning suddenly can't sing anymore, or all the horror stories that are around about transition, and that you should, or even the idea that you should just go away and come back when you look like a woman or you look like a man and you must go one way or the other. And I just think the people that I've met through that so far, we haven't even started, even just in this early bit, have blown my mind in terms of what they can do vocally, the unique emotional landscape and that well of emotion to draw from, and the incredible kind of presence that it gives you to go through something like this. And I'm just really curious as to how our voices will blend and what we can bring back to not just LCV, but other communities and other vocal traditions, which to challenge that a little bit. To challenge the idea, we know, of course, a bass can be a woman or a man or anything else, you know, any other gender that exists.
Absolutely. And I mean, before we move into some of the more technology-based work that you've been doing, in terms of how gendered things are in classical music or in sort of choral music, do you feel that in the tech space as well? And sort of,
absolutely. And I know, I mean, I've been looking at this today actually, so I don't have good up-to-date knowledge, but I was kind of researching some really key figures in electronic music, pioneers like Daphne Oram and others in that vein. I just suddenly, Susanna Ciani and people like that. And I was really struck by that there was a bit of kind of like a movement of pioneering women in electronic music, and also trans women and non-conforming people in electronic music. And I think that's probably because no one thought, I think it's because it was kind of that's just weird stuff, let them get on with it. And as soon as it became something that was, it got appropriated, I suppose. As soon as it became something that looked interesting and had commercial potential, it got appropriated. And they were sort of, to a very large extent, just erased and not talked about again, despite the fact that they were pioneers. So yes, it's very gendered, and I think there's an awful lot of warping of history, and this notion that men are technical and women are emotional and over emotional, and trans people are just no one knows what they're like, they're just weird, you know. These ideas that get carried through just perpetuate this idea that technological things are not for women or trans or non-conforming people. They are for men. They are the people that can code and understand and create using technology. It's just complete myth. There's no reason at all for thinking that. And actually, even if it were true, it wouldn't be true, if that makes sense, because even if this notion that women are more attuned to emotions or something rubbish like that, even if that were true, that still wouldn't mean that you don't need emotion and connection in order to be a technologist, because that's actually really quite essential, especially when you're talking about something like AI. Without that, you're talking about something that's pretty lethal, really. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just, you know, it's so wonderful to take in, and it's so wonderful to hear you articulate all of this stuff, because I feel all of this so much. But this coming from someone who's like non-conforming and trans, you know, hearing that perspective is so important, because obviously I'm a cis woman, or, you know, and so I feel it on lots of levels. You know, like in our pre-podcast chat, we were talking about people sitting at different intersections. I sit at so many intersections that I obviously I empathize with the trans experience. I've worked with trans people like even before my career became official, and my realization as a woman really came through my relationship with trans women. And I've never really articulated that, because I never really felt the need to articulate that. But I think now, because we live in such a polarized world, you have to articulate these things, you know. So now it's out on my podcast anyway. But to hear those views come from someone who's trans, that it gives it a different, like, like a different like magnetic field around all of those feelings. I'm trying to say this in the most succinct and sort of sensitive way.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's incredible, and I think what a beautiful thing for your experience and understanding of your own. I don't know how you described it, femininity or womanhood. As being realized through that experience and that connection with the trans community. I think that's really powerful. And actually, I think if people are honest, there's this sort of silent shaping of culture. You look at ballroom and how much that has shaped everything about music and fashion and just everything, really, film, everything, and how once that's happened, it kind of gets sort of appropriated and taken forward and yanked away, and how much we learn about our own identities through that. What it is to be a woman now versus pre that era is a different thing, and I think that's something that people struggle with somehow for some reason. But also I think if you look at the LGBT community as a whole and how there's this movement to take the T out of the, you just think, why? I mean, these are the people that actually fought for the liberation of this entire community. These were people at the front, because in their own words, they had less to lose. They were at the bottom, so it was death or fight, and they fought, and we all benefited from their fight. So it's just insane to me that later on, once you've got that, you just push down again. And that's just a sad reality, I think, of how it all works. It's kind of a very clever, intricate system that encourages everyone to push downwards on anybody who is lower or lesser in this sort of construct. It's just a funny game, isn't it, really?
And in many ways, sadly, I see that trend becoming more normalized of this punching down and sort of reminding people that our media is the algorithms that determine how we interact online on social media platforms are designed so we keep arguing with each other. So next time you feel compelled to just take a swipe, try and pull focus and think about what's making you do that, and would you actually say that to someone in person? I think so many of these arguments that get played out online and people lose jobs and they get cancelled, you just want to say, if you were actually in a room with these people, you would never talk to that person like that. You would never even think these things. You wouldn't think that, if you're friends with any trans people or any gender non-conforming or any gender minorities, you wouldn't even think that they were there. These awful thoughts that you're having, that you're tweeting, that you're saying out there, you just wouldn't even think them.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I also think you touched on something really interesting there. The word algorithm. I was speaking to an artist called Egon Branza, who I'm hopefully going to be working with. He is an incredible artist that's actually from the choir community that I'm from. But he was talking about the prejudice within algorithms. So obviously, if you're coding something, your own prejudices will filter into that system, and that system will then become we'll take that forward. So that kind of discriminatory element in AI is something that it's at that turning point right now, where once that data, the deeper that kind of coding gets pushed in, the more core it becomes in the DNA of AI, the harder that is to unpick and even notice that it's there. So that I find really fascinating. So I mean, even if you look at kind of there's been a lot of talk recently about kind of a bias within medicine, discrimination within medicine against people of colour, for example, or trans people, or women actually in general as well. If you look at that and imagine that if you're training an AI using existing medical staff, so they're learning the decisions that humans make, and that's their core learning, and then that gets embedded, and that's how they make all their decisions, then that exact systemic racism or prejudice or sexism gets embedded. And it's a whole other discussion to try and undo that, because you've kind of got it in every single piece of equipment and gear that's out there doing that role. Then it's a really frightening thought to me, and not one that I think is really understood. And it's not necessarily that would even be intentional. It would be it's learning from us, so it's going to learn our patterns of behavior and our implicit biases as well. So that was something that we talked about a lot and wanted to make a piece of work around. I'm still working out what that piece of work will be, but it will be something.
Did you watch Coded Bias on Netflix?
I haven't.
It's actually really great. It's
fantastic.
Yeah, it's Joy Buolamwini. I really hope I got her surname right, but I saw her work all about how there is racial bias within AI.
Yes.
I saw it at the Barbican a couple of summers ago. And then I was always obsessed with it. It made a really huge
yes, I'm aware of it, but I haven't actually seen it. So
yeah. Well, a big part of the plot line is about Joy's work and about her setting up the Algorithmic Justice League, which is, superhero. Joy's just a superhero but you see her in her red suit speak in the Supreme Court, and gets facial recognition software banned in some of the projects in Brooklyn, and it's terrifying and fierce, and this woman is so brave, and I would love to.
Oh wow. Yeah.
So good.
How is that guy? Thank you so much for telling me about that. That's really cool.
I'm surprised that not everybody on my fucking Facebook timeline and on Instagram and Twitter is not tweeting about this stuff. It's like, guys, there's
well, I mean, doesn't that say something in itself?
Yeah.
Doesn't that say something in itself, how interesting it is that certain things just seem to kind of disappear much more easily than other things. So it's interesting. That makes me sound like I'm a real big conspiracy theorist. I'm not.
No,
I just genuinely think that's part of that's evidence of it, in some form.
Well, because all of the people in that film are really hardcore scientists, technologists, all with like major academic backgrounds. Some of them are writers, and they're all clubbing together to be like, hang on a minute.
It's simple, and it's obvious that that's something that would happen. It's just, I guess it comes down to whether people believe that those initial biases are there or not, because you still get lots of people who are like, oh, that's just not a thing. Medicine isn't biased against people of colour and women and trans people. It's just not a thing in some people's eyes. So of course, if you deny that, then you've knocked out one premise and the whole argument falls apart. But the rest, it's not a complicated thing. It's just obvious that's what would happen. It's learning from us.
Yeah. Or just even like what we were saying earlier in our pre-podcast chat about being a brown weirdo in the UK music industry. It's like, it doesn't have a great history of supporting us or doing anything with us, bar from sort of this, and amazing musicians, but a particular four or five artists who are brilliant but have been there for a while. The other brown weirdos, we have to create our own reality, really, don't we?
Yeah, quite exactly. And I think, I think it's that thing about visibility. So where are the people of our generation who are visible for younger people coming up to see that, to see the British Asian representation. Oh, British. Why am I going all British?
British Asian.
British Asian representation. You know what I mean?
They need us.
I don't even mean that. I just mean, brown faces on things that make music that doesn't necessarily sound any. I don't know. It can sound however it sounds. I've had that so many times. Just there's not enough of an Asian component for it to be on this station, or then it's not. But then it's you should approach BBC Asian Network, really, because that's where we put all that kind of music. I was like, well, have you actually listened to it? Because there's very little that's obviously like, you know what I mean? It's like, what are you talking about? If you listened to it, if it wasn't brown, you wouldn't think anything of it. You wouldn't think that. So that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, just the way that we get kind of pigeonholed.
Girl, this is a story of my life. Even though the BBC Asian Network, brilliant, and I know the DJs on there are great. They're as weird as we are.
Exactly, and they're wonderful. They're fighting the good fight. Yeah, and they're incredibly smart and talented and beautiful, actually, and very open-minded.
Yeah.
But the ultimate thing is the actual structure underlying it all is not of their making. It's a whole systemic thing, and I often find that what happens is, and this is no criticism of any of these artists, because we all do what we have to do to survive, actually, and some people would say it of me, but there's the name change thing. I'm Anil Sebastian. My actual surname is Kamalagaran. I chose that because I'm mixed race. My mum is German, so the Sebastian is my middle name. So really, I'm going by my first name and my middle name. But I know lots of artists who change their name or have an acronym or something else so that they don't have these connotations of being, a South Asian or an Asian artist. So they just sort of like are encouraged that way to sort of either go with appearing or sounding or naming themselves that makes them seem whiter or blacker, and the brown bit is just the bit that people just don't want anyone to be that, and that's just so wrong. Yeah.
No, I absolutely hear you. I mean, it's been the story of my life. But what I would say is that it's taught me to fight for my self-esteem. And so I don't really get, what's that syndrome where you're like, oh, I don't deserve it. What's that called?
Syndrome.
Yeah. I don't get imposter syndrome, because I'm like, no, bitch, I worked for every tiny little thing that you see that went right. That about 20 things didn't happen, or the 10 projects didn't happen. I got about 20 people being shady to me. I've had people stop me in clubs, just say the most vile things, just vile things that are almost worthy of their own comedy series because of how vile people have been to me. So therefore I don't get imposter syndrome, because every little thing I've worked so hard for, and that's made me a much happier person.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something that is so important to hear, because the narrative is so kind of dominated when you're talking about women in tech, women in music, when you're talking about race issues, when you're talking about transness. It's dominated by tragedy, being pushed down, imposter syndrome, not feeling good enough, and these are all things that probably happen to most of us on the way, in some way or another. But I just feel so compelled at the moment to just show joy is an act of rebellion, and kind of confidence is an act of rebellion, kind of showing a different story, and being actually we tell our own narrative rather than, you know, play along with this kind of like sob story in a way. That sounds awful, but you know what I mean. It's like I just feel, particularly with the trans community at the moment, I think we're all really pissed off. I mean, I'm speaking for everybody, but within the group that I'm setting up, one of the common things that people were sharing was that we're pissed off. We're pissed off at kind of not being able to claim some fucking joy for ourselves, and every story being about being murdered or being oppressed. And you think, well, actually, like, you know, we have joy as well, you know, and we're good at stuff too. We talked about that. You know, it's that thing of like
excellent at stuff. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But you know that thing where sometimes you feel like you feel like the conversations with people in the industry or people that you meet, or you know, it's never about the actual fucking work. You know, it's about the kind of like, and what's it like being a brown musician?
Yeah.
What's that like? You kind of like, I can talk about that, but you know.
I do lots of interesting things too. Yeah.
My work, most of my work's not about being brown, funnily enough. I'm really quite used to being brown. I don't really feel the need to make all my work about it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I absolutely hear you, which brings me on to the epicness, which is Daffodil, your piece Daffodil, which is an audio-visual work. It's as much a musical work as it is a film work. Could you talk us through a little bit what Daffodil is and the themes you are exploring?
Yeah. It is a film, a music film, I guess. And the starting point was music. The starting point was really creating, it started with lyrics and music that were exploring consciousness. Initially I was exploring consciousness from the perspective, there's so much interesting research happening at the moment, and from the perspective of kind of artistically, but also from the perspective of physics and the potential philosophical consequences of different ideas and conceptions of consciousness, and their implications for technology and vice versa. So that really interested me. It interested me from the point of view of is consciousness unique to humans? You know, does it even exist, or is it an illusion? Is it a user illusion? There's all sorts of things, and kind of like, what's the connection between consciousness and the physical world? Is there such a thing, a difference? You know, increasingly people don't think so. And also, is it algorithmic? So can it be, you know, can we write it down? Can we make something else conscious? And why would we want to do that? And if we did, what would happen? All of those sorts of things. Very sci-fi, really. But I wanted to not be too sci-fi. I wanted it to have emotional resonance. And that's why I held off doing it for so long, because I thought, you know, I've never brought the two worlds of what I'm interested in, you know, the physics and the philosophy and the music, together. And I've always wanted to, but I was scared of, like, you know, just sounding like I'm reading out from a kind of encyclopedia of facts, or I don't know. I didn't want it to be sort of crass or contrived. So, but then something happened, which was, I was here in Folkestone where I live, and I went to this thing called Connecting Creatives, you know, and I met this incredible woman called Susanna Howard, who's the director of a charity who I do a lot with called Living Words. And something really surprising happened, which was she gave me a copy of The Things Between Us, which is the first anthology of a book of pieces written, well, created by people with advanced dementias. And it really surprised me because I obviously didn't know very much about dementia, as it turned out. but B, also the level of absolute incredible clarity and philosophical insight from some of these words. So one of the lines that really stood out to me was, "I can't think, but I am." And another one was, "I don't know that I think." Something that, if you know of someone who's had a brain injury or has a dementia, or you've experienced, a neurological kind of variation, or you're neurologically diverse in some way, or you have mental health things, or you've just, there's so many points in life where we can relate to that. Anybody can relate to that idea that, like, I don't even know if that kind of dissociation with yourself or your own thoughts. And I love the way that kind of turned René Descartes' cogito on its head, which is, I think, therefore I am. The act of thinking proves my existence in itself. And this was meant to be, this sort of like solid bedrock, like, we're okay because we've got this. And actually realising that, okay. And then I started to think about the work of Derek Parfit, the philosopher, and started to think about his conception of personal identity, something that I really related to, mainly because of my own experience with my own identity and the changes within it. That there is no single truth to our identity, and it's changing over time. There's lots of things that he says about identity, which I can't easily sort of summarize, but it's essentially that there's no single truth about our personal identity, and that to some extent we have this idea in our minds that who I was as a child, I'm the same person. What does that mean? We're always changing, but what is it? What is it? What is that thing that continues? What does that mean? Where does it come from? What's the essence of it? I guess. But I loved Derek Parfit's writing about personal identity, and so somehow the emotional resonance that made, the kind of sadness, the joy, the detachment, everything that comes with some of those words, started me off on lyrics. And it started me off with this idea of a character and the idea of loss, and exploring it through death, exploring it through, if somebody died, would you bring them back? How would you do that? If you did, what would they be? Who would they be? And all the ethics around that and the journey of it. And that kind of led me to think about myself as a child, and I found all that archive footage, and I thought, well, what would an AI make if it was making a conscious being just out of this old archive footage? It didn't have much else, maybe a bit of DNA and a bit of archive footage. And I imagine that it would be this kind of sort of strange sort of creature in this sort of underwater world. And what would our connection to that be? How would it think and feel? And all of these things that we wouldn't have access to. So that's kind of like a really long-winded way of trying to explain this film. But on a surface level, it has a simple narrative that's much easier to grasp than a lot of that stuff is.
all that stuff is fascinating, by the way. And because I've sat and watched it, like really studied it a couple of times over this afternoon, it's bringing everything back and making me want to go back and just sort of rewatch everything. But in the most simple form, it's about an AI. You tell me.
Oh, yeah, okay. I guess okay, here we go. It's about a scientist who goes rogue and tries to recreate a dead child in the form of an AI.
Beautiful.
And and that's explored through this underworld kind of universe that this creature creates.
absolutely beautiful. And there were several different locations. Like there seemed to be that beautiful building in Folkestone that I think you were in, but then there was a whole lab scenario. Where was this lab? I was fascinated.
Oh, well, I can't actually tell you.
That's fine then.
No,
Well done, those shoots, Anil.
It was no, it was a data center,
Right.
which has been heavily processed, and it's completely unrecognizable now with all the kind of overlaying and CGI and everything else that's gone into it. And the lab is completely created by Tom. So Thomas Rawle is the person who did all the animation. I didn't do the animation. I just need to say that. But I did write the story. But Tom is a genius, and he made that. It's really hard to tell actually which bits are just what was there and which bits he kind of made when you watch it, I think. So he did a good job.
Yeah, well, now you're bringing that up. It's what I like about it is that there's definitely the stuff which looks very animated, sci-fi, kind of Ridley Scott, and then there's the pastoralism of the whole Folkestone setup, and then there's the vintage kind of what looks like 90s VHS tape, and it all works together, and that's kind of a thing to get those three visual languages sitting together. As a part of a seamless story. I mean, now, you know, I mean, like hats off to you, babe. It was fierce. That's really, really fierce.
Thank you. That's so. Woo!
Woo! I know.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I'm really proud of it, and I mean, Tom is incredible as an artist, and so this was a collaboration, really, and you know, it was wonderful to have him work on this because it's so precious to me, and it's really like a baby to me, and I worked with him. I worked with my brother Ingmar Kammerlagaard, who's also in the film in a way, which you might spot, and you know, the work that he did, and also Cherif Hashizume as well. So it was really a core team of four of us, and then there were lots of other people who also made it all happen. So yeah,
fantastic
to do that. And I nearly died, I think, of like my brain nearly actually exploded, and I'm not sure if I could go through it again, but I loved it.
Yeah, well, I can definitely understand that. With every kind of major AV project, you do just feel like, you know, you come home and then you just order Deliveroo and you just all day and you're just exhausted, just eating shite in your pajamas because it's exhausting.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I'm quite I can't it makes me sound very fragile, but I'm not. I'm quite sensitive in the sense that like I get a bit absorbed into the world, you know, of it. So I'm sort of there, and I'm a bit kind of like not present in anything else I'm doing, and like for like 6 months I was kind of like, people would be talking to me, I'm just not there.
Yeah,
completely emotionally unavailable to people I love. You know, I want to be less like that when I'm making work. I think that's one resolution.
Yeah, well, when you make work, it is like an exorcism, you know, a lot of stuff comes up, and so it's normal to be feeling pretty mental. I mean, you know, like making things like as much of a joy it is to realize your vision, as much as it like is it the vagal nerve that it wakes up and sort of makes you feel amazing? So it does all of these things, but you know, it's, you know, you're working against timelines and budgets and all the other hiccups that come with a production. And you know, it sounds like everybody was lovely on this production, and I'm also been really fortunate to work on many projects full of incredible people, but you know, there sometimes are some little tricky people, you know, here and there.
Always.
You know, and things playing up and things out of your control, and you're dealing with these really big themes of identity and your childhood and kind of like technology and blah. And so, you know, having a mad exorcism as you're making things It is nuts. It's just
Yeah, and
nuts.
of course, all the self-doubt, the unknowns, and also once you get so close to it, you lose perspective altogether. And to you, it all makes perfect sense, but you're sort of still trying to connect with the part of yourself that's like, what's this like for someone who's never seen it? Never heard it. And that I find I can do that with music on its own because I've done it longer. But getting so immersed in this was like I just lost all perspective completely. I was awful. But I'm so glad I did it, and I feel like that kind of it was one of those things where you feel like something breaks through in you, and and weirdly that preceded a personal breakdown as well. So it was kind of like it didn't trigger it off or anything like that. But it's that thing of like, oh gosh, yeah, like I really thought I had myself worked out. But sometimes you do a project like that, or you have some experiences like the ones that followed it that really humble you and ground you and make you realise you don't know shit.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I hear you. I'm like completely amen to that. So I'm going to wind down the interview now. So have you named this trans and non-binary choir yet? Do they have a name or
No?
Okay,
unnamed as of yet. At the moment, it's called TGNC, Transgender Non-Conforming Choir. Don't know if it will stay that. I mean, it feels a little bit like maybe we should be a bit more. I don't know. I don't know. We're thinking about it still, and I want it to kind of come from the collective group as well, in some way. So.
Yeah. And so if people do want to get involved and they just want to shoot you an email, what's the best of getting in touch with you?
Yeah, Anil at lcvchoir.co.uk, or just DM me on Instagram. I'm very approachable.
Yeah. Oh no, you're an absolute sweetie.
But I do want it to be like that. I want it to be very like, not hierarchical and all that shit. Just if you're interested, just have a chat with me and talk about it stuff. Yeah.
And the final question is, who is your favorite woman in tech?
Oh God. There's so many to choose from.
Who's popping?
I mean, okay, like right straight away. I mean, it's like because she's kind of like set me on a music path. Imogen Heap, I think, is a phenomenal technologist. Just complete pioneer and genius, and is pretty boundless in her ambition, and has just pulled off some phenomenal technological feats, which have been just so inspiring to be near and be around and see. So I think it would have to be her for me, I reckon. That's the first person that came to my mind.
Amazing. Well, yes, I'm also incredibly fond of her, and she's been really supportive and really encouraging of me, and she's great. The whole setup, the sort of the team she's assembled around her, everybody is everybody's a good egg, everybody's like ridiculously talented, and she's really shown how you can be an artist in today's environment. She took some very bold decisions very early on in her career, and when you think of the lineage of British music divas, there's nobody like her, and there's nobody with her story, and there's no one who's quite spanned the heights of pop and worked with people who are that mainstream and people who are just a bunch of fucking nerds and weirdos. And I love her for that. There's nobody in I love looking at the narrative of things, and when you look at, when you look at the narrative of British female musicians, she's taken it to this other level, and amen has made it a much better place for all of us weirdos. So there we go.
Yeah, exactly.
And Anil Sebastian, thank you so much, darling.
Thank you, my love. Thank you. This has been lovely.
Thank you so much, Anil, for that incredible conversation. And thank you all for tuning in and subscribing. Thanks to The Rattle for all of their technical support on this podcast. You can find out more about Witch at Instagram, Facebook and twitter.com/witch. You can go to witch.com to find out news and updates and to sign up to our monthly newsletter. Until next time, thanks and goodbye.